This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Hello and welcome to The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand. Spoiler alert, I'm Joe Hildebrand, and this is the real story on a whole bunch of things that might have appeared a little bit different to you this week. We're going to get the real story on whether or not the PM has been mocking Australians with a disability. Yes, the PM has been going after disabled people. Oh, that cruel, savage monster. But did he really? We're going to actually find out if that is the case or not. Plus, did the Palestinian protesters really have to march on October the 7th? We've got the real story on all that and much, much more coming up. But first up this week, let's get to what is undoubtedly going to be the biggest yarn over the next few days, which is that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese insulted disabled people. That is the headline going around on just about every news outlet. Just looking at the latest bulletin from the New Daily news website that's meant to be kind of, well, it's bankrolled by union super funds and stuff. So you'd think that'd be a bit Labor friendly, but no. Breaking, PM mocks disability. What did the PM actually say? Well, the PM didn't mock anyone with a disability at all. It was in the middle of question time, and he had Angus Taylor, the shadow treasurer, constantly interjecting after being told to stop, and he interjected one more time, and the PM said this.
Have you got Tourette's or something? You just sit there, babble.
Order.
Yes, that's right. Have you got Tourette's or something, is what the PM said, which I reckon is something that most Australians at some point or another would have said about someone who talks too much. We all got a chatterbox. We all got, people in our lives who just can't shut up. But it's not insulting someone with Tourette's. It's just saying that you're someone who talks a lot and that is what you understand Tourette syndrome to be, someone who involuntarily talks, who can't stop talking. In fact, that's a gross oversimplification of what Tourette's actually is. It's more a nervous tic sort of thing, and it doesn't just apply to language or talking or swearing, which is another common misconception. It can apply to all sorts of things. But the PM is going by the sort of popular understanding in the same way that you might say to someone who's a bit unhinged, mate, geez, you're a psycho. Are you then insulting psychos? So this is the thing. It's something that's just said in the vernacular. It's something that's said by way of an understanding about something that isn't really anything to do with the actual condition itself. You might say of a policy position that doesn't make sense or that oscillates, or if a government changes its mind on a policy, that it's acting schizophrenic. Is that an insult to schizophrenic people? Again, I've got bipolar. And I talk about things being bipolar all the time. They run hot and cold, like that song by Katy Perry. Is she insulting bipolar people? Should I be offended by Katy Perry's MasterChef song? Anyway, so the PM clearly wasn't trying to insult people with Tourette's by this comment. He was trying to insult Angus Taylor. Anyway, someone got up very, very quickly, and straight afterwards, you could see from the expressions of some of the PM's colleagues, half the House, by the way, laughed. And then very quickly, oh dear, oh my God, what have we laughed at? And someone got up with a point of order, obviously, and objections. And the PM, before the person could even get to the dispatch box, said this.
I withdraw, Mr. Speaker. I withdraw.
Yeah.
I withdraw.
So there you go. Surely you would think that would be the end of the matter. But no, everyone's still upset about it. Everyone's still angry. Everyone's still having a crack at the PM. And you know who are the people who are most upset? The people who say that the world is political correctness gone mad. Yes, the people on the right. The people who are the champions of free speech, the people who are saying, no, we've got to get all this woke crap out of our system, out of our society. They're the ones going nuts at the PM for jokingly saying that someone who talks too much has got Tourette's, even after he's apologised for it immediately at the time, and then again, even more profusely, hours later in a formal statement to the Parliament. And this is the craziness of it. This is the hypocrisy of it. And I understand the right's frustration because, of course, it is the lunar left that is usually the first to be outraged by any kind of thing. And they were outraged when Scott Morrison said, quite innocently or naively that he and his wife Jenny were blessed not to have had to have to support a child with a disability. And there were plenty of people who, rightly or wrongly, those who do have disabilities, I imagine, probably took a bit of exception to it and said, well, hang on a minute. I don't feel like I'm cursed or my family was cursed just because we had a disability. Now, I've got to tell you, as someone whose best friend is a quadriplegic, and you don't get much more physically disabled than that, these are people who joke about their conditions all the time, and these are people who know how tough it is, and they're certainly the last to be offended by anything. But point being, people were jumping down Scott Morrison's throat whenever he said anything remotely un-PC, and jumping down his throat indeed when he had the temerity to go on holiday while there happened to be some bushfires in Australia. I was not one of those people who were outraged. I wasn't outraged then. I'm not outraged now. And I think we need to turn the dial down on the outrage if we're going to get any actual progress or anyone half decent to be a political leader in this country, because no one's going to stick their neck on the chopping block. But think about this. All the confected outrage about what the PM said took place on a day when the biggest debate was about a motion to recognise the suffering of the Israeli people and the Jewish diaspora more generally. And there was further debate on whether or not you should therefore also recognise the mass devastation in Gaza and Lebanon. And that is the number one debate there. And you've got Peter Dutton saying that he's such a strong supporter of Israel that he's not going to support a motion that expresses solidarity and sorrow with Israel because it also mentions Lebanon and Gaza or whatever, blah, blah, blah. So you've got argy-bargy on how you actually deal with a tragedy, a humanitarian catastrophe of that kind of proportion. And God knows what the potential triggers could be for a further escalating conflict that drags even more countries in. And so you could argue that it's, pretty piss poor in and of itself to be arguing, playing politics over a motion that recognises the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust and the tens of thousands of Palestinians and Lebanese who have been affected since. It's a bit like someone getting shot dead and lying next to you and you complaining about a stub toe. Speaking of right and wrong, with a little dash of hypocrisy for good measure, let's touch base with the pro-Palestine rallies that caused such controversy all over the country on the weekend. Now, thankfully, those rallies seem to be mostly peaceful after agreements were reached with police to avoid going past the Great Synagogue in Sydney and to avoid any movement on the actual day of the anniversary itself. So that protest was categorised as a vigil, which meant it was kind of okay. And it didn't do the pro-Palestinian cause any favours. And this is the real issue here. You have these people who claim to be pro-Palestine, who claim to be supporting the plight of Palestinians. And what they are actually doing by provocative measures like this is turning people against them, turning people away from them. And it does this in a couple of ways. One is you have these absolute numbskulls rocking up, holding pictures of the dead leader of Hezbollah as though he's some kind of hero. Hezbollah, let's not forget, is a prescribed terrorist organisation. Under Australian law, Hezbollah is a terrorist organisation, and the leader of that terrorist organisation was killed, and you have people protesting in the name of Palestine who are celebrating this guy. So what does that make everyone else think? It makes them think, oh, those pro-Palestinian people, they're just terrorists or terrorist sympathisers or terrorist supporters. Is that a good look? Is that good for your brand? I wouldn't have thought so. So they turn people away by doing that, piss people off by doing that, or just make them think that the pro-Palestine cause and the terrorist cause, the Hezbollah cause or the Hamas cause are indistinguishable. So that is one moronic thing that they do. And the other thing, of course, by even having these rallies, these protests on the day of the anniversary, when so many Jewish people in Australia are in deep mourning, many of whom would have known friends or family who are among the dead or the hostages, to have that on that day was intensely provocative, and again makes people think that these people are just one-eyed extremists with no sympathy. And of course, if they don't look like they've got any sympathy, then why should we expect to have sympathy for their cause and for the suffering on their side? And it is yet another instance of these protesters not helping the cause of Palestinian people, but actually hurting it. Our guest this week is someone who is my journalistic spirit animal. He is an incredible journalist, far more accomplished than me. He was the political editor at the ABC, then went on to become the political editor at Channel 9. He's written what I believe scientists call a ball terror of an article for the Weekend Australian about just how some of these practices that are meant to make us feel all warm and fuzzy inside are actually not doing anything at all beneficial for the environment and potentially even harming them. And the one example that struck me, because I just couldn't quite get my head around it, is those really annoying paper bags that the supermarkets are handing out these days, and you stick anything in them, they immediately tear, then you have to buy another one. But of course, no one wants to pay 25 cents for a bag anymore, even though they'll go and spend $3,000 on a Louis Vuitton one from Louis Vuitton. But point being, he joins me right now. Chris Uhlmann, welcome to The Real Story. It's a pleasure to have you.
Oh, John Hildebrand, what kind of animal? Like a wombat, skunk?
I imagine like half tiger, half wolf, with maybe some dragon wings. You know,
dragon wings would be good.
Maybe a liger. Let's just go for a liger. Let's take it back a notch. And it's great to have you on the show. This article, which you can still get on the Oz, it's titled "It's Not Easy Being Green, but Only If You're a Blue Collar Worker," and you sort of go through some of the imposts that are being put on either just ordinary everyday consumers or indeed people who work in the energy sector who are going to lose their jobs because of this transition. These paper bags in supermarkets. Now, I understand we want to ban the single-use plastic bags, no problem. They bring in the repeat-use plastic bags, repeat, reuse, recycle, fantastic. We're all feeling good about ourselves. And then suddenly they have been phased out and we're getting these old school, very retro, in fact, paper supermarket bags. And you've done a bit of a deep dive into this along with some environmental organisations and found that, surprise, surprise, these are actually worse than the reusable plastic bags.
Yeah, Joe, look, I love an old paper bag too, and I'm old enough now to remember that when I was young, we had paper bags, and what we used to do is take the paper bags without the handles for school, turn them inside out, and then cut holes in them for eyes and draw faces on them. So I've always liked a paper bag. I'm in favour of a paper bag. And you would think, you'd think that a paper bag's better for the environment than a single-use plastic bag. But there's this thing called life cycle analysis that people clever than I do on the entire life cycle of a product to see whether or not it is actually better for the environment. And when they did that study, as you would imagine, they found that those bags that you get given, which are supposed to reuse, the green ones, so if you buy those and you use them 104 times, that's once a week for 2 years for shopping, then that's better than a single-use plastic bag, but only if you use it that often. So that's the best option. But a single-use plastic bag, on everything they did on life cycle analysis, was always better than a paper bag in terms of what it did to the environment. It might be hard to get your head around, but that's what they found. And part of this is consumers. Consumers think it's better for the environment, but thinking that doesn't make it so.
So not only are paper bags worse than repeat-use plastic bags, they're also worse than the single-use plastic bags. Can you talk us through, because that is quite mind-blowing, I suppose, like you say, as someone you think, oh, paper must be better than plastic because, whatever. Take us through how this study was done.
Well, looking at it from the time that you produce it and the way that you produce it through the time that it might get recycled at the end and where it ends up in the recycling chain. And when they did that analysis, when they ran the two against each other, the single-use plastic bags, for complex technical reasons that I've not entirely got my head around, it came out better. Again, it doesn't sound like it should be that way, but that is what it showed. And by the way, there are lots of other studies which have found the same thing around the world.
And it is, I mean, once you just shake that warm, fuzzy feeling, you do think, well, hang on a minute, these paper bags are constantly falling apart. They're constantly getting torn. So they're often not being used more than once. They are then, if the owner does the right thing, put in for recycling. And that obviously requires a certain amount of energy to recycle the product. And of course, even if you're getting something from recycled paper, which they are supposedly mostly from, I think, then they are using that energy to produce that. And so you get to the point, well, maybe just a single, very cheaply, easily produced plastic bag, which you probably then end up putting your rubbish in and then throwing out. And maybe it all ends up in landfill anyway if it gets sent to Indonesia or China. So it does start to sort of raise all these questions that, as you say, the supermarkets themselves appear to know the answer to, but because no one sort of wants to actually admit it, we're all just sort of going to go on this sort of symbiotic gaslighting of each other and just pretend that everything's fine.
Yeah, look, I think people are genuine, Joe. You know that. People do want to do something about the environment. They mean it. And when they put their stuff in the recycling bin, that they assume that that's going to recycling. But you just raised it. Whether you put a plastic bag in a recycling bin or a paper bag in a recycling bin, unfortunately, a lot of that recycling now is being shipped to Indonesia and ends up as landfill there. And the Indonesians are begging us to take it back. So our systems are broken. And the whole point of all of this was to draw attention to the fact that it is great to have the intention to try and do something good for the planet, but we shouldn't delude ourselves. And I think there is no bigger delusion in some of the stuff that we're doing in the energy sector at the moment with what we're doing with electricity. It is we are trying to get a feel-good grid that won't actually work terribly well and will need an enormous amount of backup, rather than saying to people, you know what, this system simply doesn't function. It simply does not function without a gas backbone. And remarkably, the people who've cried longest and loudest, the Teals, the Greens, members of the Labor Party, and I included that, by the way, Chris Bowen up until recently, who condemned all fossil fuel, have actually made it harder for Australians to get gas. We're now going to have a gas shortage, which is almost entirely, in Victoria's instance, down to the politics of Victoria. They banned gas exploration in Victoria. Then they start whining about the fact that they want Queensland's fracked gas. They won't do any fracking in Victoria. It should be sent to them. Well, those things are all on long-term contracts and going off to Japan. No one in Australia was going to open up those those mines in Queensland if it wasn't for the Japanese cash that did it. And the Japanese rely enormously on our gas. There's plenty of gas in Australia. But can you believe this, Joe? We are currently in the process of building gas import terminals in New South Wales and Victoria. So we're going to have the gas. It's just going to be imported from somewhere else, and it'll come in at an import price, and it will help set the price of your electricity, and that price will be high.
There you go. Chris Uhlmann, true eco-warrior, true energy realist. Thank you so much for your clear-eyed analysis of that. I'm sure for most, if not all people listening, they will be realising a lot of this stuff for the first time, and it's something you've done a huge amount of work on, I know. Can you give us a sneak preview of the name of your doco and when we can expect to see it?
The real cost of net zero, Joe, because, by the way, once we've done the electricity sector, so think about this, then we have to work out how we make concrete, how we make steel, how we make plastic, and how we make ammonia. And ammonia, by the way, is used to feed half the world's population. And people might never have thought about this, but when you eat a tomato, if it's had fertilizer on it, then it's got natural gas embedded in its production, because the way that we get that fertilizer is to use natural gas to get it out of the oxygen. We don't have another process for doing that at the moment. We have to invent one. We haven't even started the process of trying to decarbonise. There is fossil fuel in absolutely everything you can see in the built environment. And to get to net zero, we've got to change the way we do everything in the next 25 years.
There you go. Well, with people like you, hopefully providing some really clear analysis of what we need to do and the true cost of what it's going to take to do it, hopefully we'll be able to get there in a way that actually works.
No one knows how much it's going to cost, buddy.
Without us all, that's right.
It's lots. Put a T in front of it.
That's right.
We're talking trillions.
That's right. I'm going to apply my Bachelor of Arts to that calculation and say, I'll agree with you. It's lots. Chris Uhlmann, thanks so much for joining us on The Real Story. Now, as you know, on The Real Story, we like to solve all the problems facing Australia in about half an hour each week. And it's fair to say we've got a pretty good track record of doing so. I would say approximately 100%. And I'm about to ratchet it up to 101 because there was a little piece I noticed in the conversation by a lecturer in property economics. I didn't even know that was a thing. I'm just a humble art student. So her name's Lyndall Bryant. She's a lecturer in property economics at the Queensland University of Technology. And she has come up with a solution to the housing crisis. And I thought, well, I'm just going all in on that. I want to get in on the ground floor on that one, both figuratively and literally. And Lyndall Bryant has suggested, this is amazing, that you could fix the housing crisis, fix the gross shortage of rental accommodation, not just by unleashing all the empty homes that are going to waste, but by unleashing the empty bedrooms in homes that already have people living in them. She has said there are 13 million unused spare bedrooms across the country. That'd solve the housing crisis in an instant. I know I'm sleeping in my spare room. Let's leave my marriage out of this. In a briefing paper for the QUT Centre for Justice, Lynn O'Brien suggests that, at least in the interim, these spare rooms could be part of the solution. The census says about 3.2 million Australian homes have one spare bedroom, another 3 million have 2 spare rooms, and another 1.2 million have 3 spare bedrooms or more. And she suggested that maybe older Australians, empty nesters who don't have to use their entire house or have these empty rooms, could take in boarders. Maybe younger people. Maybe it could help ease loneliness for older people living on their own, to bring in, a young person who's trying to get a foothold in the rental property market. I'm not sure how much an 84-year-old would have in common with an 18-year-old moving in. Maybe they could discuss the benefits of Mahjong and Kanye West. I'm seeing a lot of mashups. Interestingly, my grandmother was a pioneer in this field. She had a guy called Noel come and paint her house. And as the day sort of wore on, I'd noticed when I'd go over there that Noel was spending slightly less time painting and more time having cups of tea, which my grandmother would very happily make for him. She was a very good host. And then Noel started having sleepovers. Not with my grandmother. Don't look at me like that, Anna. Anyway, so Noel, it turns out, was sort of kind of a bit homeless. So he started painting, and then he was living in the spare room in my grandma's house while painting the house to kind of pay for the board. I'm not sure. It didn't seem to be enough painting going on, I thought, to justify that. He also drove her to mass every week in his little red car. And so there you go. The solution to Australia's property crisis, as pioneered by my grandma and Noel the painter. I wonder where he is now. And that's all we have time for this week. If you've got any feedback or there's any stories you'd like us to look into, just flick us an email at therealstory@novapodcasts.com.au. If you've got a spare room to rent, please contact Noel at Parts Unknown, Places Unknown. If you want to send us a message on Insta, I'm there. You can't miss me. I'm the handsome one. You can also find me by the handle at Joe_Hildebrand and slide into my DMs. Noel's going to slide into my DMs, do a bit of painting, then slide back out. And I'll see you next week.